We have two panelists today. The first is Glenn Barnes, Senior Project Director at EFC at University of North Carolina. Glenn, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Wonderful. We can hear you, Glenn. And our second panelist today is Tom Roberts, President and COO of Aqua North Carolina Incorporated. Tom, are you there?
I am, Lisa.
Okay, marvelous. At this time, I will turn the presentation over to you two.
Okay, thank you so much. Appreciate everybody's time today. This is Glenn Barnes speaking, and I'd just like to again extend my welcome to you to our webinar. This is our third in a series of 4 on water system partnerships and regionalization. If you were not able to join us for our previous 2, one looked at some guidance on interlocal contracts and agreements between water systems, and a second looked at an example of 5 systems in South Carolina that merged to form one new water system. Both of those webinars are archived on our website, and so I encourage you to take a look at those if you're interested. Just to show you some pictures of our presenters here, I'll introduce Tom Roberts in just a minute, and then myself and Lisa are on here as well. And I'd just like to thank all of you for joining us today. As Lisa mentioned, we have about 80 people registered and good geographic spread across the country, which we've been happy to see on many of our webinars in the series, both on regionalization and other finance and management topics. So thank you all for joining us today. Before we get started, I just want to take a minute to explain to you what the Environmental Finance Centers do. I'll start with my center at the University of North Carolina. All of the Environmental Finance Centers, ours included, are based at universities, and what we do is we work with people like yourselves who provide environmental services, and we think about how to provide those in fair and sustainable ways. And so we do that through a series of workshops, professional education workshops, webinars like we're doing today, some one-on-one assistance that we'll talk about a little bit later in the broadcast, and then applied research and tool development. And so we've got the website for our Environmental Finance Center will be in the slide deck for you, and then as well for the entire Environmental Finance Center network, which includes our sister center at Syracuse, where Lisa works, and 8 other centers, all based at universities across the United States. And on this particular project of working with small drinking water systems, all 10 of us are working together. And we've been very fortunate to receive funding under a cooperative agreement with the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. And we're at the end of our first round of funding, but we're very delighted to receive a second round of funding. So we'll have about 18 more months of work on this. And we work very closely with EPA and with Steve Hoagie, who's listening in on the broadcast today, who's been a great project officer for us. And what we do is we are providing training and technical assistance to small drinking water systems under this project in the areas of finance and management. And so again, Environmental Finance Center, that's really our focus. We have some people in the centers who have engineering backgrounds, but many, like myself, come from a public administration background or a public finance background, economics. And so we're working with systems primarily on how to pay for the services that they offer. And today our focus is going to be on water system collaboration, and that's one of several areas where we have been working for the past year and will be continuing to work over the next 18 months. We also have resources available on asset management, water loss reduction, fiscal planning and rate setting, energy management of water systems, funding coordination among multiple sources, and then finally managerial and financial leadership. And so we'll have an opportunity later in the broadcast for our small systems listening in to request some one-on-one help from us, which is all paid for under the EPA grant. And we've also done a number of webinars in these areas. Some of the areas like asset management and rate setting are completed, but you can go to the EFC network website to view all of those. And then we've got a couple coming up with water loss and one more on water system collaboration. We'll have some information later on for you about that as well. And so before we get into the meat of the presentation, we just wanted to do a couple of quick polling questions so we can see who's on the line with us today. first question that I'm going to ask Lisa to pull up is a question about where do you work? And so this will be a pretty straightforward one. You should just be able to click on your screen. And so please select if you work for a governmental water system, non-governmental water system, state, territory, or federal government office, or if you're with a consultant or technical assistance provider, or if we didn't quite capture where you're coming from, please go ahead and check that other box for us, and we'll just give you a second to fill that out.
Looks like folks are still clicking away, so I'm going to give it a few more seconds here. Okay, and here are the results.
All right. Well, thank you for that. Looks like we've got a good mix of folks on the call today from all of those categories, so thank you very much for joining us. And then just one more introductory question. This is really more for the water systems on the line. How many customers do you serve? So as we're getting that poll question up, if you serve 10,000 or fewer people, which is roughly 3,300 accounts, you count as a small system under EPA's definition, so go ahead and select that. If you serve more than 10,000 people, please select the second one, and if you're not a water system, we didn't want to leave you out, so just go ahead and choose that option for us.
All right, I will close the poll at this time. Here are the results.
All right, so it looks like most of the systems on are from small systems and a couple from larger systems, and then the rest of you from the state and federal offices. So thank you, all of you, for joining us today. So at this time, I'm going to turn things over to Tom Roberts from Aqua North Carolina. Tom's the President and Chief Operating Officer, and Tom's going to talk about an example of a water company, I guess the water company model as we're calling it, and Tom will explain a little bit about how they interact with small systems and what they're looking for, and then at the end of that, we'll be able to have time for your questions. I just want to mention two quick things for you. So as Lisa mentioned earlier, we are recording the webinar today, so if you have some colleagues who were not able to make it, we'll get you that link. It should be up in the next few days. And then also, we will make a copy of the presentation available to you by email and on the website, so I know a number of you will be wondering about that. And with that, Tom, I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thanks. Thanks again, Glenn and Lisa, for having me here today. I appreciate that. And I thought it was a little ironic when I was getting going this morning that there was a lot of talk about the anniversary of the World Wide Web today, and here we are doing a webinar. I think that says a lot for 25 years ago when the web started. But thanks again for having me here. And I'm going to talk, a lot of what I'm going to talk about is going to be maybe about North Carolina, some experiences there, but I also have a lot of experience in Pennsylvania, which is the largest state of the Aqua states, Aqua America states. And a little background on me, I've been with Aqua for 33 years. Started in engineering, worked my way through operations. I've been in North Carolina as the President and Chief Operating Officer since 2007. Happy to be here and enjoy doing what I'm doing. So a little bit about North Carolina, and kind of tied to the polling questions. We serve about 250,000 residents. So most people would say we're a large water company. Under most circumstances, we serve very small systems in North Carolina. So we are a large multi-state organization that serves, I have a system in Western North Carolina where I serve 3 customers. So, and it's a standalone, standalone system. So it's a little bit of both. In North Carolina, we're about 160 employees, and North Carolina is made up of 100 counties. We're in about 52 of those, not the exclusive server in any of those counties, and about 1,600 wells. So when we say customers, we talk about connections. So about a little less than 70, or a little more than 75,000 connections, and like it says there, 850 separate systems. And then we're also a wastewater company in North Carolina. So and actually it's a business that we are pretty active in this state. So we're in 18 counties and have just over 15,000 wastewater connections. And then every year we're investing in our systems somewhere between $10 and $15 million. And I'm not going to dwell on that other than to say that there was some legislation passed last year that's probably going to incentivize us to spend some more within the state. And then for those of you that don't know about Aqua, we are a publicly traded company on the New York Stock Exchange under ticker symbol WTR, market cap about $4.6 billion, and we're in it says 10 states. We're actually in eight states as a regulated business, and one state as a non-regulated business. And I won't dwell on it. We're about a 130-year-old company, and we were actually started by a group of Swarthmore College professors in southeastern Pennsylvania, which is a story for another time. Thank you. So here's a map of North Carolina that kind of shows our footprint within the state. We're speaking to you from Orange County, which is about center right of the state, and our corporate headquarters in the state is just about 20 miles from here. And then we have an office in the Charlotte market, one in the Triad in the middle of the state, and we have one down in the coastal part of the state, and then some smaller officers in Fayetteville. Kind of gives you an idea of what we're talking about. From tip to tip, driving wise, it's about 6 hours, and we go literally to Virginia and down to South Carolina in our service territory. So again, to talk a little bit about North Carolina, we are a growing state. The economy, we got hurt by the economy like all other states, but not maybe as bad as some, and we're regrouping maybe quicker than others. Show a little bit about the metro areas, and it's an interesting state, not unlike Pennsylvania where I came from, where you had Philadelphia on one side and Pittsburgh on the other. You've got Raleigh on one side and Charlotte on the other. And you've got the Triad in the middle, but you've got a lot of rural country in between, and north and south. Ag's still a big part of our business, and will continue to be so. And then that bottom bullet is no different probably than many other states. By some measures, there's $16 billion that needs to be invested in drinking water, wastewater, and stormwater over the next 20 years. And so for those of you not in the business, I don't want to completely creep you out by telling you that that's a water pipe, but guess what? That's a water pipe. That's a unlined cast iron pipe that was put in probably in the 30s, 40s, or maybe the early 50s, and has tuberculated from the inside, which is not unusual. The more modern pipes are cement lined to prevent that tuberculation, but that pipe was probably in service for maybe 50, 60 years, and I would venture to guess that there are people on this call and in other parts of the nation that are still drinking water out of pipes that look like that. So again, a little bit about the view of water needs, and this is the same whether it's a big system or small system, rural system or an urban system. Customers, we're like many utilities, but customers expect unlimited capacity on 100% reliability. Sort of sounds like the internet at home. That's what you expect, right? But in the water business, that's what people expect. And of course, they want it at reasonable prices, and everybody, it's a very subjective term. I'm sure there's been conversations in previous webinars and in other events that everybody's been to about conservation rates. Of course, any of us that are in the business know that as use goes down, rates have to go up just to cover the fixed cost of business. And there are still many people out there that believe that water should be a free commodity. So in North Carolina, we talk about partnerships, and that involves a whole bunch of things. And partnerships for regionalization. And I will tell you that the regulators in my state view my business model in North Carolina as a regionalization tool. Even though many of our systems are very divergent in geography and in source and in socioeconomic status and everything else, they still view it as a regionalization. So what I like to say is connecting pipes isn't the only way to regionalize. You can regionalize it from a management standpoint. So let's talk a little bit about the potential partnership model. So the first one is an outsourced O&M model, operations and maintenance model. That's pretty simple. It's the entity, public entity in most cases, pays a contractor for some level of service. And it could be just to operate the source of supply, do the distribution system, fix things, whatever the case may be. It's all outlined in a contract, in a document. The second one, which is sort of the traditional utility model that Aqua operates in most cases, not exclusively, but in many cases, is a total asset purchase. So that's where somebody like Aqua or an adjoining city or somebody like that comes in and purchases 100% of the assets of the public system. Basically just takes over ownership. And they take complete ownership. They're responsible for the upkeep, the investment, the administration of any growth, whatever the case, billing, customer touch, the whole 9 yards. So that's traditional sort of asset purchase. But it really is a partnership model. A well-run utility, like mine is, we have relationships with HOAs and governmental agencies. So it's absolutely a partnership, even though there's one entity that owns things. And then a joint ownership is something that actually we got proposed by a government entity just recently, and that's and we'll see it on another slide, but it's basically where the private entity like an Aqua and the governmental agency create a third entity, and there's actual joint ownership. And we'll talk a little bit about that on another slide. And then combined ownership, for lack of better terms, is the utility purchased the assets of the system while the selling entity, the public entity, in most cases retains the real estate. And there's some advantages to that that we'll talk about a little bit on the next slide. So we'll start with challenges first. I'm not a big believer in using the word issues. I believe in challenges because they really are. I mean, they can all be overcome if both entities are willing to have a discussion and keep an open mind as to what might work. So on the outsourced O&M, it's a margin business. So it's a cost plus business, if you want to call it. And the contractor, they're managing to a margin. So they have a different incentive than the asset purchaser might. They're really there to do it as economically as possible so that their margins either stay the same or get bigger. And sort of broad brush statement, contractor not invested in the community. That is true to a certain extent, depending on who the contractor is. I think if you're the person who has outsourced the O&M, that you have to determine or have to demand, maybe is a better term, what level of involvement you want them in the community. On the total asset purchase, which is the sort of the traditional buy the entity from somebody else, quite frankly, the biggest issue from our point of view, from the private utility point of view, is the public entity views it as a loss of control. And so a challenge that has to be overcome. Especially on the water side of the business, and it applies on wastewater too. Maybe not as much, but we found many sellers that have an emotional attachment to their system. They've been in the family for multiple generations. They might be the lifeblood of the town. They might have been, the mayor's son works there, or whatever the case may be, and they don't want to lose control. But there's ways around that, even in a total asset purchase. Again, it's a partnership, so there has to be, you have to define what that control really means. Control can mean growth. Control can mean investment in infrastructure that is played out. It could mean a whole lot of different things. But we've seen it in many instances where control is the biggest issue. On the joint ownership, which is sort of the two entities come together and become one, there are certainly some legal questions when it comes to that. Clearly, a private entity like an Aqua can create another entity, another private entity, an LLC or a partnership or whatever the case may be. But what we found in North Carolina is that there really is no legal way that that we found that a unit of government can join with a private company and create this third party. It was a rather unique request by this one entity that we were discussing, and so we ran it to ground, which took some time. Had multiple legal opinions on it, and I believe that there's not really a way of doing that. But the other problem with that is that there certainly would be divergent goals with the two entities that become one, and so you have to be real careful of defining what the goals are. A private utility like Aqua, we're a for-profit entity, and we don't apologize for that. But the governmental unit might have different goals or different pressures. Rates certainly would be one of them. The election cycle is certainly one of them. We'll talk about that a little bit when we get further into the presentation. But I think those are some of the things you have to be worried about. And then the combined ownership, that's the buy the assets, lease the land that the asset sits on. You just got to be careful that you have the ability to recover those leases as an operating expense going forward as a private entity. So potential benefits. The outsourced O&M, clearly the contractor takes the risk of the employees, and the public entity retains rate control. And again, you see a theme here. So control, control, control. The public entity, and that's many times or what we've seen why public entities are interested in the O&M. They want to get out of the sort of the day-to-day operation, but they want to retain the control of the rates more than anything. On the total asset purchase, the benefit there is that the seller, the public entity, has no risk of direct funding infrastructure in the future. So if they sell it the next day, there's a large main break or another asset fails, the buyer, the private utility would be responsible for funding that, and then spreading it across rates across the rest of its ratepayers. And then one of the things that we talk about when we go and talk with public entities is it gives them a chance to monetize an asset that probably is not their core business, and allows them to take, in many cases, once they defease any bonds or pay off any debt or do whatever they need to do there, and they end up with some cash that they can go do what their core business is, whatever they decide what that core business is, whether it's parks or firefighting or new government building or saving it to keep and trickling it into the tax base, something like that. So there is some great advantage to the public entity on the total asset purchase when it comes to that. On the joint ownership, I'm going to go over that one quick because, as I said, North Carolina, I'm not sure that we've kind of come to peace that it's not something that's possible, but the benefit, at least from the from the seller's point of view is there's shared rewards if growth should occur. And then on the combined ownership, the biggest advantage of the combined ownership is that cash stream, that last bullet where it gives the public entity an ongoing cash stream. Many times what we found is the public entities, they love to get the big cash payout if it's an asset purchase, but the astute sellers understand that they might not be there after the next election cycle, and they're trying to protect that cash stream going forward so that it can go on in perpetuity. Okay, so some of the strategies. Probably the biggest strategy when we're talking to sellers in North Carolina is in North Carolina, Aqua has statewide rates. So in most cases, my customers at the coast are paying the same rates as the customers at the mountains. And so if something should happen in a small system, let's say out in the western part of the state, and we have to invest $50,000, or better yet, $100,000 on a filter system for naturally occurring minerals, that gets spread across the base of 75,000 customers. And so instead of, we started this conversation, I said I had a system with 3 customers. Imagine 3 customers trying to absorb that versus 75,000. That's a big difference. And so that's really the advantage of a large utility like Aqua and a multi-system utility. And then we talked a little bit, I mentioned that regionalization does not necessarily mean connecting systems. We serve a lot of systems all across the state. They're not connected physically, but they certainly are connected financially and through management and billing and the resources that a system like ours brings. We have, one of the things that we do as a multi-state organization is that we borrow at a corporate level and then push down to the state level. So I'm not even borrowing at a 75,000 customer connection system level within the state of North Carolina. We're borrowing, when we're borrowing for debt, we're borrowing at a corporate level, $4.5 billion market cap company level, and so we get some pretty good rates. Of course, we bring equity to the table also because we are a publicly traded company. And then what we've seen over the last, I would say, 3 to 5 years is in North Carolina, they call it principal forgiveness, and in my mind, I call it grants. And but that and other free money is just, it is going away. I think as much as many of the small systems would not like to hear it, I think it's just the reality. And once it goes away, it is very unlikely that it ever comes back. And so many of the small systems have lived on grant money or free money, whether it came from the state or from the federal level, and it is going away. The other thing is that the public-private partnerships could be used for other infrastructure improvements. One of the models that we didn't really necessarily talk about is that if a system, let's say, has a water plant that needs an extensive renovation, but they don't want to give up control, there are models where they could sell or give the water plant to a buying company like Aqua, and then we would be obligated to make the investment and then recover our investment with a return over a period of time. So there are, I think we'll talk a little bit about how you have to be flexible, but there are other models too. One of the things that we try to do is to continue to level the playing field between public and private entities. So for many years, the private companies in North Carolina, up until a couple of years ago, did not have access to low interest money, which is way different than grants and free money. And about 3 or 4 years ago, that changed, and now companies like mine and all private companies in the state have access to state revolving funds on the water side. And so cost of capital is in the private sector is just a component of cost that's passed along to our ratepayers. So if we can get money at 0% interest or very low interest, the only benefit is to the ratepayer, not to the shareholder. And so that's one way of leveling that playing field. And then we'll talk a little bit about flexibility. And I think both sides need to continue to remember that that partnership goes on forever. You know, we're in communities in Pennsylvania. There's communities that we've been in for 130 years. In North Carolina, there's communities we've been in since their inception. And you're a partner in that community forever and ever. Now, when you're dealing with 850 separate systems, to be everybody's partner all the time is pretty hard to do. But we reach out to our HOAs that a lot of them know our operators, and I think that's important. Especially, we've bought some systems. We bought a system last year where it had been family owned for many years, and it was sort of this is sort of the textbook how a water system gets started. It was a well driller that had drilled a bunch of wells for a bunch of developers, for community wells. Developers realized they didn't want to be in the utility business, so by default, the well driller ended up in the utility business. Well driller had 2 sons, and the well driller passed away, and so his sons divvied up the business. One got the well drilling business, one got the utility business. And the one that got the utility business passed away, and so then the guy that was the well driller, the son that was the well driller, ended up with the utility business and quickly realized that it was not a business that he had any interest to be in. And so he reached out to Aqua, and we were able to strike a deal. And this was 22 systems in a couple counties in northeastern North Carolina, but we rolled them into our consolidated rate structure. They get all the benefits of a large company, and we actually went to the state and got 0% SRF money to do the improvements that were necessary. The system had not been taken care of real well. They were actually using some wells that were never permitted, and so we had to do that. We did some testing and found that they had naturally occurring minerals in the water that needed to be treated for. And so we brought all that in, and other than their rates going from rates that have been in place since for many years to our consolidated rates, the customers I propose would say that they ended up with a better water system, more reliable water system, and certainly a more professional operator. So what's the reality? The water and wastewater business is the most capital-intensive utility business. There's been a lot of discussion about that. A lot of fixed costs in our business. In my state, in North Carolina, we are blessed with growth, and so we are a state that's looking to grow economically, bring jobs in, and with jobs brings people. And so one of the things we struggle with is where can we find reliable sources of water? Not an unusual predicament, but we don't have a lot of surface water impoundments. Most of them are being used, and so groundwater is one of the sources. And discussion for another time might be the use of reclaimed water, which is gathering more traction here in the state. We've had, last year being the other end of the spectrum, but not long ago we went through the drought of all droughts. In fact, the first year I came in May of the year of the drought of record in the state, and I think I was here 2 weeks and was in front of a TV camera trying to explain why our customers were going to have to conserve. So we've gone through droughts, we've gone through very wet periods in the last year. Last year was very wet, but it's highlighted the public's awareness on water issues. And The other thing is that some people look at water still as out of sight and out of mind. It's, you don't see wires. You don't, as long as you can flush the toilet and turn on the spigot, it's there. Nobody ever thinks about the pipe. So I want to make sure I keep going relatively quickly so we have time for questions. But again, in North Carolina, big investment, supply and capacity. One of the things that we've seen, we've actually had many discussions with the School of Government and in other venues, is in many cases the municipal systems are not charging the full cost of service, full cost of water. And that includes the depreciation on their infrastructure, and then they have to be able to invest in new infrastructure going forward. And of course, the private model, the for-profit model, if you will, the only way we exist is full cost of service. So when we go in for rates, we have to prove the cost of service, prove our infrastructure investments, and so we are certainly a full cost of service company. Again, reduced consumption is real across all the states that Aqua serves. We're seeing that, and we'll give props to the School of Government. We like to use one of their slides here. You can see that you can see what's been going on here in North Carolina. Big reduction in use, and any of us that are in the business, I know there's some other utility people on this call, and certainly regulators. You got to realize that just because the way we recover expenses and our investment and our return is through sales of water. So sales of water goes down. We still have an investment that's made. That pipe doesn't get smaller. The well, we don't shut a well off necessarily or take it out of service. So there's a big fixed cost that still has to be recovered. So many of us in the business are explaining on a regular basis, to customers, I'm using less, yet you're charging me more. Why is that? Well, that's the answer. It's a fixed cost of service, and we still have a revenue requirement that has to be met. And we don't see this slowing down. We've got some data on some of our systems here in North Carolina that shows that it's still a downward trend. Now, we had a very wet summer last summer. We'll see if we get a normal summer this year, how things go. But it's a very interesting phenomenon, and it is definitely a push-pull when it comes to rates. So what can potential partners do to prepare for regionalization or partnership? So the unit of government-owned systems, clearly accurate books is key. There are differences between sort of the NARUC utility model of books and the government books, but the clearer the books are, the easier it is for us to determine a fair price and be able to go to the regulators and say this makes sense. Be realistic about what you want out of the partnership. And I know it sounds kind of sort of primary, but really the partnership has to be that. It has to be a give and take, sort of like a good marriage. It has to go, and it's going to go on forever. But don't ask the buyer for things that are just not realistic. And then understand the purchaser's motivation. And when I wrote this, I thought, well, I wonder what people are going to think what that means. And the reality is it's not necessarily profit when it comes to a system like Aqua. Surely, we have shareholders to respond to, but looking to spread fixed costs is a big motivator for a purchaser. So we take fixed costs. If I go buy a system in North Carolina and add a couple thousand customers, we're certainly not going to have a second president. So spread my cost over more customers, that kind of thing. And then on private systems, on systems like mine, be sensitive to the concerns of the partner. Understand, again, the relationships are forever. Key is the gestation period of a deal is long. When you're dealing with private or public systems, it takes time for decisions to be made. Sometimes they try to get consensus. It's very different than a private side of the business. And I will tell you that if you're in that gestation period and you go through an election cycle, you could hit the reset button at a moment's notice, and you just have to deal with that. And then remember, one model does not fit all situations. Be flexible. I'm just going to touch on rates just for a second. Again, full cost pricing. I know I sound like a broken record there, but really that is the reality that has to happen in our industry. The municipals, the units of government, we classified people as non-governmental systems, which includes me, I suppose, but it also includes nonprofits, HOAs, a lot of people with motivations that are way different than their peers in that group. So full cost of service pricing needs to be something people understand. The rates need to increase to pay for infrastructure rehabilitation. Many of us have heard over and over and over again that there's this infrastructure need out there. Well, the only way to pay for it is through rates from our point of view. It's got to be paid for by the customers. You might get, it goes back to that grant money going away. At some point, somebody's going to have to pay for this, and rates is the mechanism that we all have to recover that. And remember, it's not a one and done proposition. This is a forever business. Like I said, Aqua's been in business 130 years. I've been doing this 33 years. There will be people here 130 years after me that will be replacing things that we're putting in the ground today. So it's a forever kind of thing. And that's hard to explain sometimes to people with different points of view. Education is key. I love doing webinars like this or seminars, but even if it's just meeting with your HOA, meeting with your customers, meeting with business leaders, talking to the regulators, people need to understand what's going on out there and what the reality is. And then that second to the last one, where water may fall from the sky, but it takes effort to get it to your tap. That goes back to people think water should be free. Water just isn't free, and certainly the mechanism to get it to your tap in a safe and consistent manner is not that way. So I'll give you a little example. You might have seen this before. In my state, Aqua Tap Water is about a penny a gallon, and you kind of compare it to some of the other things that people are buying out there. Bottled water is a great one, but there's a lot of other ones. So that one more time. Yeah. So end with a nice, pretty picture. Yes, that really is a main break there on the right. I'm happy to say that was in Pennsylvania, not in North Carolina. But the pipe on the left is being installed in Pennsylvania too. So proactive versus reactive. Guaranteed there were customers out of service on the right-hand side, and that's what you're trying to prevent. You want that reliable source of water. And so that's my presentation, and I'm happy to take questions. I appreciate everybody's interest in this topic.
All right, thank you. And we want to give you an opportunity to type your questions in. We've gotten until the bottom of the hour to take your questions, but while you're doing that in the question box, we're just going to do a couple of quick polling questions for the small drinking water systems on the line. We have some technical assistance available where we can work with you individually on finance and management topics. And so if you're interested in working with us, we just want to give you a chance to indicate that on the slide. So if you're from a system serving 10,000 or fewer people and you want help on any of these areas, up on the screen you can select as many as you want to, developing a budget, calculating financial indicators, looking at how capital projects will impact your revenue needs, setting rates as we've talked a lot about, or figuring out whether your rates are affordable for your customers. Go ahead and just select any of those that you'd be interested in. We'll follow up with you. And so Lisa's got that poll open for us now.
Can I have a comment? So this is Tom again. not only small systems, and I'm sure they're looking for small systems, that's what this is geared to, but systems like mine, we've used the school of government here to help us with some rate issues here in North Carolina, and expect to use them actually coming out of this rate case on another project. So great resource. If you're a utility out there, reach out to your ESC or your resources in your state.
All right, thank you. And at this time, I'm going to close this poll question. Are you ready for the next one?
Yep, let's go ahead with the next one. So just a couple more categories where we can do help, again, just for the small systems on the line. So if you'd like help with an asset management inventory, understanding system water loss, managing the energy use of your system, or where you might be able to get those dwindling loan and grant program funds, go ahead and just indicate for us again. Same thing, you can pick as many as you want to. We'll be in touch with you.
All right, I will wait a few more seconds as folks are clicking in their responses. Okay, and I will close the poll at this time.
All right, and then just one last question, and this is actually for everybody on the line, whether you're a small system or not, and maybe this is somewhat shameless, but at the Environmental Finance Center here at UNC, we have an environmental finance blog, and we write about drinking water topics usually about 2 or 3 times a month. These are short 500, 600-word articles, and so if you're interested in water finance topics and you'd like us to sign you up, just please go ahead and indicate one way or the other. And if you say no, we won't be offended. It's okay.
All right, looks like we've got most of our responses, so I'll close that poll.
All right, thank you.
Yeah,
and just, oh, sorry, go ahead, Lisa.
Before we get into the next section of our webinar, I just want to make sure that we mention to everybody that we do have an evaluation survey that I will circulate to you all in the chat box on your control panel. It will also be sent out to you in a follow-up email to this webinar, so that's coming at you right now. If you could take just a few moments to complete that survey, it's very helpful to us in planning for future webinars and getting your feedback, so we really would appreciate that.
And I'll just mention we've got a couple of upcoming webinars scheduled on water loss reduction on March 17th, so a week from today, and then on March 31st. And we've got one more on partnerships and regionalization that will probably be in March. We're just finalizing the date now, so please check your email for that. And I think the rest of the time, Tom and I will take your questions. And again, please use the little question box to enter those in, and Lisa will read them off to us if we have any in there. And we've got about 10 minutes or so to take your questions.
Okay, we do have several questions already entered, so I'll get going on those. Our first question comes from Ghassan Khaled, and Ghassan asks, when you consolidate several systems, does each maintain its PWSID number?
Yes, so when we, if they're physically consolidated, if we actually connect pipe and create one sort of master water system, we do consolidate into one PWSID. But the answer in my state is I have 850 separate PWSIDs for all these little divergent systems. So again, for those of you in the business, that yes, that does mean 850 separate CCRs every year and all the reporting that goes with a separate system. But if they're physically connected, certainly the PWSIDs are consolidated.
Okay, thank you, Tom. Our next question comes from Deborah Parati. And Deborah asks, how do you, Aqua, recover your investment if small water companies sell to you for repairs or rebuilding?
So, okay, we could take the whole 10 minutes to explain how rate making is done, but let me try to do it quickly. In rates, we as a utility are governed by in this state, North Carolina Utility Commission, and the using and consuming public, my customers, are represented by what is called the public staff, but think of that as a consumer advocate. And so I go into rates and I have to prove my expenses. And so if I prove my expenses, electric, labor, fuel to drive around, chemicals, all that stuff, I get to recover that dollar for dollar in rates. And then on my investments, whether it's in a small, well, all my systems are relatively small, but my investments, as long as they are deemed prudent and they benefit the public at the time of the rate case, and they're not considered overbuilt. In other words, I don't build a 20,000 gallon a day facility and I only need 5,000 gallons a day, then I get to recover that and I get a return on that investment. In my state, it's it's 50% debt and 50% equity. So if for every dollar I spend, 50% of that I go borrow money from somewhere, and 50% comes from our shareholders. And on that 50% from our shareholders, I have the ability, the regulatory ability to earn a rate of return. It doesn't mean it's a guarantee by any stretch. And I will tell you that in my state, I never earn what I have the ability to earn. And in my state, well, we stipulated in this case 9.75%. We're waiting on an order, but I'm guaranteeing you it is not 9.75% on that side. But that's the basic rate model.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Our next question comes from Hiwat Gebremariam, and I do apologize for my pronunciation if I'm off. But this question has two parts. The first one is, what type of partnership would you recommend for decentralized systems, e.g. septic systems, water wells, etc.? Yeah,
so Aqua's preferred partnership is the asset purchase. It gives you 1 point of responsibility, 1 point of control, and 1 point of responsibility. But there are, like we discussed, there's many different models. The O&M model is a margin model. It's a cost plus model. It's just a different kind of way. The one thing I would say, if you were a seller, that you need to recognize that somebody's still responsible for the investments in infrastructure, and that we see many different models when it comes to O&M. Sometimes the contractor is, and sometimes the entity still is. So our preference is the asset purchase model when it comes to acquisition.
Okay, thank you. And the second part of the question is, what type of partnership would you recommend for communities receiving service for the first time but do not have the capacity to manage utilities themselves?
Right, so that's a good question, because in North Carolina I run into that a lot with new developments, and so again, if you can spread it across a bigger base, and I'm going to switch gears a little bit. I'm going to go to a wastewater model here, but we have a community not far from here in Chatham County where the developer came and put in the infrastructure, sold off all the lots, and we have all the capacity to serve 1,500 units. We serve 150 today. So we spread a lot, some of that fixed cost gets spread across the rest of the Aqua wastewater customers. So the more you can spread across customers, the better. As that community builds out, it will benefit all the other customers that helped it in the beginning parts of that. Many times when we're dealing with developers in that model, we'll ask for a revenue contribution until we reach a certain saturation, though, also. So I think there's different ways of doing it. If you're bringing in a utility service to an area that has existing houses that are going to come off and go, say they're on private wells and want to come to the utility, you kind of know where your tipping point is based on how quickly you can get pipe in the ground. So again, spread it across a bigger base. That's the key to the equation.
Marvelous. And we have one more question here from Deborah Parati again. And Deborah is asking, is there a chance if a small system sells to Aqua that their water rates might go down due to the advantage of Aqua's larger infrastructure?
Certainly there is that possibility. We've seen that. We're actually in discussions with, we're a growth company. We're looking to grow all the time. So we're talking to some other utilities, and certainly those are ones that we love to talk to, because we can spread presumably some of their expense across a bigger base. But yeah, there is possibility that they could go down, or they could be held steady for a much longer period of time than they normally would if they stayed, say, as a small system. So there certainly are some advantages, more than just the idea of having a big company. There's some financial advantages there to the customers.
Yeah, and one thing I'll add to that is, I mentioned earlier, we did a webinar about the merger of 5 small towns in South Carolina. They ended up seeing their rates go up as a result, but they were artificially low to start with, which I think was one of the reasons why they wanted to get out of the water business. And so the rates for the customers did go up, but they were actually lower than what they really should have been for each of the communities if they had been charging full cost pricing, and probably lower than what they would have been given the infrastructure needs of those communities if they had remained separate. So, I think there's a question of whether the rates will go down, but also a question of, is partnerships and mergers, whether it's the Aqua model or the model we saw in South Carolina or others, is that a way to mitigate future increases of a larger amount than they would have been otherwise?
And I think, just to put a bow on it, I think that's the key, is you spread it across a bigger base, and you mitigate the issue. Again, if it's a big investment in a small system and you only have a small system to recover it in, the rates have to go higher than spreading across a bigger base.
Wonderful. Thank you both. That's all the questions that have been entered so far. I just want to thank everybody very much for joining us today.
Yeah, and I'd just like to thank Tom for coming over and sharing his experience with us. So, as Tom mentioned, we've worked at the Environmental Finance Center with Aqua North Carolina in the past. There are many good private water companies in the country. Tom's local and knows us really well, and I'm glad he was able to come and share his experience of this particular model. Our contact information is up on your screen right now. We'll get you a copy of the slides, and if you requested any of that one-on-one help or the blog, we'll be in touch with you about that as well. And we hope to see you next week on our water loss webinar and on some of our future events. So thank you all very much.
Thank you, everybody.
Take care now.